That is often the key predictor of whether you're going to have social rights litigation and whether it's going to be effective in implementation. So, and that varies between countries, and I think the call of this conference is how do we support those countries who are perhaps more weaker in this regard. The lastly, obstacle is the political achievement of the goals. Often you need to start with politics first, and if you can show the politics has failed, policy has failed, then you can more likely win in courts and get concrete orders. In the background paper, there's a number of lessons learned that have been set out from litigation strategies over the last 20 years. Many of you have contributed to the thinking around those lessons learned. And I won't go into that except to say one of them. And that's for broader public interest litigation. For both winning in court and winning on the ground, you need to have a wider movement. You need to engage with wider social movements. You need to have the communities involved in the case. And this is the main lesson for the lawyers in the room and elsewhere, and the more legally oriented NGOs. But there's also a lesson there for the social movements and communities, is to contact the lawyers, to ask what individual cases are you taking, what can be used in a broader systemic way. And it's been fascinating in some countries how social movements who were originally sceptical of adjudication are now fully engaged. What should ESCR do, just to conclude? Well, I think the case law database is the key product from this network, but it only has 72 cases on it. It's a question of scaling up. Secondly, I think you can do more in terms of bringing people together working on this issue, both the lawyers but also social movements. If you look at other international networks, take the International Federation of Surveyors, for example, of all things, often they bring together people regionally to talk about what's happening at the moment, how they can work better together within their legal system. I think the original Chiang Mai workshop was good, but I think we need more on a regular basis. Thirdly, the listserv. There is a listserv for the adjudication work group, but it's very underutilised. The reason is I think that most people don't know each other on the listserv, and you don't use listservs to ask questions if you don't know people. So I think we have to get to know each other a little bit more, but perhaps also use the listservs to ask questions, particularly from comparative and international experiences. I think the core of an international network is these things, information and information sharing. It's always dangerous, I think, for a secretariat or network to get involved too much in interventions. It can destroy sometimes the nature of the network. But I think that ESCRnet can think about some strategic, perhaps, places where it can intervene. And I'll name possibly 5. One is a strategic litigation fund to work with donors and other big NGOs to have funds available for cases at the local level and national level, particularly those that could go up, for example, to the various optional protocols and regional systems. 2, building the links between social movements and the lawyers. 3, maybe even to think about one particular case that may have transnational implications that we could work together on, perhaps in the adjudication work group. I mean, at the moment, for example, in HIV, you've got criminalisation laws sweeping across West Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. Is this one area where we need to combine forces? Fourthly, do we need to create an index of justiciability? We've created indicators and indexes for almost everything else. But what about justiciability? If this is an obligation of states to have effective remedies, how are we measuring it? And when we quantify it? Can we compare countries? It's a dangerous field, but perhaps we can make a contribution by contributing information from our countries to such an index ranking. And lastly, a suggestion from Carolina just this morning. Can we, for example, when countries are going through constitutional and legal reform processes, all pile in and seek to influence that process? So it's not just Yash Gai who is sent to that country, but you get also voices of those who are working on the ground. And that leads me to conclude with the Zimbabwe case. When people in Zimbabwe and Titumwiza take cases in other places of the world, how are we there to support them? Thanks very much.